Yo, what's going on, Time Clan? It is your boy King Time X here, back with another video, and you guys already know the deal. This is going to be what if Deku was the son of Ghul. Rebooted, you could say. Oh, and I gotta say one thing. Shout out to Neptune for the little contribution that she had in this project as well. This has been a long time awaiting, and well, how should I say it? There's been a couple of different alterations that we've made to it as well. But yeah, I've said enough. I'm not really making much sense anymore. Let's just get into the video. Rachel Ghul had lived long enough to see the growth of humanity. For over 1,000 years, he had watched from the sidelines, seeing how humanity basically was destroying itself. But during the last couple of centuries, he saw something that intrigued him. This being the awakening of quakes. Or at least that's when people are calling them nowadays. People used to call them meta abilities, and during the basically this. When quakes were just coming into the world, many people were confused, and quakes began to cause chaos for many people as well. Many people didn't know how to use these abilities, and this would end up causing them to injure themselves and others along the way. With all of these quakes suddenly arriving into the world basically fell into a form of chaos for a while, and Rachel Ghul was watching from the sidelines the whole time. Sure, he had some of his men end up awakening quakes as well, but he knew how to handle these abilities. After all, he had lived long enough to gain an understanding for the human anatomy, the human physiology, considering the amount of times he had been in the Lazarus pit in order to keep his youth. And each time that he had gone in the Lazarus pit, he noticed that he had gained strength and speed above that of a normal man as well. He looked at many people, and he figured that he could be a form of guide for them. He ended up guiding many people in this new world in order to become part of the League of Assassins. Many people would look at Rachel Ghul in a new light. Many people saw him as a guide of sorts throughout these last couple of centuries, and they also believed him to be a god of sorts with how long he had lived for. He was, for all intents and purposes, immortal or semi-immortal. The fact that he could live for so long, and even though all of this history was insane to some of his disciples. And in the next couple of centuries, with all of the people he had managed to gather up, he would end up creating his own army of sorts. He called it the League of Assassins still, but it had grown to become far grander than it would have ever been beforehand. And he would have even gotten the likes of All For One on his side as well. He found this person to be intriguing. This person who could steal quirks and give it on to others. That would be extremely useful later on. Although the two were at odds at first, Rachel Ghul managed to convince All For One in the end to join his alliance, be part of the winning team. They could help so many more people in the world if he joined his side. For all All For One knew, Rachel Ghul could even help him learn more about his abilities than he would have learned on his own. Imagine the riches that he could get as well during this time. All of this just sounded so tempting to All For One that he would eventually agree to it, and the two would have become partners. The two would have seen the rise and downfall of humanity over and over again, but they would eventually end up having to split ways for a little bit. This being because of the rise of a new hero by the name of All Might. His strength and speed was impeccable. All For One had mentioned how his little brother's quirk just seemed to always get in the way of him ever achieving his dreams. All For One made the biggest mistake of giving his little brother a stockpiling quirk on top of a quirk that he didn't even know about beforehand. He thought his little brother was quirkless. But then, all of a sudden it turned out that no, he just had a useless quirk. Apparently he could pass on his quirk to others, although it was an empty quirk at first. But now mixed in with the stockpiling quirk that he gave his little brother, it allowed him to just pass on his quirk to others throughout the years as well. Although he thought he put an end to it with his little brother, it would be passed on to the next person, the next person after that. He thought he would try and get rid of it each and every time, he still failed. And now this guy, All Might, had the quirk, and the quirk had managed to become so strong to the point where this guy was even able to be All For One, despite the fact that he was using a Lazarus pit and he had so many quirks under his belt. He had so much experience on top of that, but no matter how much he tried, he could not handle All Might. And Ra's al Ghul, he had seen the news as well. He wasn't able to see the main regular news, but in the underworld, many people already knew what happened. He would have gotten his news from there, the underworld. That's where all the real information came from, and from there, he would have realized just how important it was to have a quirk in today's society. He wasn't all that stressed at first when it came on to quirks, considering the fact that he had many people under his allegiance with quirks. And sure, while some did not necessarily have quirks, they were still part of the League of Assassins for their skills, but apparently you needed both skill and a powerful quirk in order to make way in this society. And if that were the case, he would be all for it. His latest child over the years was around the age of 4 or 5 at this time, and he decided to have this child go through a process. This process would allow for him to have a quirk, hopefully rather strong quirk. This would involve him going into Lazarus pits multiple times throughout the years. Sure, it would give him moderate super strength and speed, but he also began to inject some other chemicals from the Lazarus pits into his child's veins as well. He would make sure that each and every time it would have a bit of an effect on them. Sure, it caused them to act out at times, but he would usually keep them restrained to a chair. He would keep them under quite a bit of maintenance, you could say. He kept them strapped to a chair for most of the time when he did those injections, because of the fact that he knew that his child, Izuku, he would end up lashing out right after he was injected with the serum that was made from the Lazarus pits. Although Izuku would still lash out, he wouldn't be able to break away from the chair. His eyes were already green at first, but they would begin to glow at times whenever he injected the serum into him. Over the years, something weird would also begin to happen to Izuku. This would be, well, a mutation, you could say, with all of these injections happening to Izuku, and of this weird substance as well. It would begin to shift the way his body worked, and by the time he was 14 years old, he had a rather strong regeneration quirk. He was able to regenerate from almost anything, really. He didn't really need to sleep either, and on top of that, he could have a lot of strength as well for some reason. Izuku was not a normal child by any means. He was practically the perfect child for a Ghul, or a Ghul, however you pronounce his name. Ghul had seen Izuku as his perfect experiment, an experiment gone right. The only issue with Izuku was the fact that he would end up lashing out still. He would lose his sanity each time he got injured to a certain degree. If it was a small injury, a small minor injury like a cut to the finger or something, yeah, he would not lose his sanity or anything. It would just be a slight twitch and he would be back to 100% immediately. But if it were something along the lines of a broken arm, that would be another story. Sure, he would heal from it almost instantaneously, but he would not be sane for a good couple minutes. At times, he would need to have full-on bodyguards restrain Izuku because of the fact that he would just go insane from the injuries he had gotten. Broken arms, broken legs, sure, they may have healed, but then Izuku and his strength would just go haywire. He would still go haywire. It was mainly because of the conditions of his quirk. The condition of how he gained this quirk was through the Lazarus pit, and because of that, every time that he needed to heal, that's why he would go insane. It was as if he was a walking Lazarus pit at that point. This would also be the reason why Ghul were decided to hire not even really hire, more so keep a bodyguard with Izuku at all times. Her name would be Cassandra Cain. She would be Izuku's bodyguard throughout most of his childhood and when he was a teenager as well. Although Izuku would try and convince his father at first that he didn't need a bodyguard, Ghul would comment on the fact that he knew Izuku did not necessarily need a bodyguard for the fact that he was weak or anything. No, far from it. He knew that his son was strong and capable, but he needed to have a bodyguard with him in case he ever got injured to a certain degree, healed from it, and went insane. That was his biggest glaring weakness, and people could use that weakness to their advantage if they were to ever get into a real fight. If Izuku were to ever get into a real fight and he got seriously injured, then it wouldn't be all that great because of the fact that he would still heal. It's just that his opponent would basically be fighting a sitting duck at that point, with the fact that they lost all sense of rationality. They did not know how to fight properly, went insane. All sense of skill, all sense of martial arts, all sense of tactical skill would have been thrown out the window if Izuku were to lose his sanity at times. And that's why he would have Cassandra Cain with him in order to make sure he did not get injured that much. And even when he got injured to the point where he would go insane, Cassandra would be there to watch his back at all times. It was just that simple. Although Izuku didn't really like Cassandra at first, he would grow to appreciate her. Although she did have her weird tendencies, more so with the fact that she barely spoke. But Izuku got used to it throughout the years. He understood her. Probably the only person that really did ever understand Cassandra. By the time they were 15 years old, the two of them, they were ready to go to high school. And Rachel Ghul actually pull a couple of strings in order to make sure that they managed to make it into the best hero school possible. This school would be UA. And what's interesting is that the two of them wouldn't even go into the hero course, no. Rachel Ghul mentioned that he wanted Izuku to be the heir to, or like the heir to his throne. He wanted Izuku to take over when he was an adult, and he wanted Izuku to go into the business program at UA, or the business course, you could say. Izuku would learn how to do math, do the hard numbers, those cold hard numbers, you could say, and learn business strategies while at UA. But he also had other things in mind. You see, another reason why Rachel Ghul wanted Izuku to just be in the business course was because of the fact that he wanted Izuku to get a feel for another sort of business. This being the underworld business, you could say. He would have it to where Izuku and Cassandra managed to also become part of the Shiosaikai. He wanted these two to go and become part of a gang, and going just off of nothing but their own strategies as well in order to become part of this gang. He didn't want Izuku to use his real name while he was part of this gang. Izuku Al Ghul, that would immediately send off red flags. They would immediately know that, hey, this is Rachel Ghul's son. They would know immediately. Every gang pretty much knew Rachel Ghul. Everybody in the underworld knew. Everybody in the underworld knew who Rachel Ghul was, and therefore they would understand that if they heard the name Izuku Al Ghul, they would understand who Izuku really was. They would naturally accept him into their ranks, but he made sure to have an alias for Izuku. Izuku's alias during this time would be Yamakumo. Izuku's purpose within the Shiosaikai was to bring back up that branch. While joining, if he were able to join the Shiosaikai or the Yakuza in general, he would basically be able to bring back up that branch to notoriety. The Yakuza, they had lost notoriety throughout the years, and Rachel Ghul's goal was simply this, just to bring them back to notoriety. After all, this was a branch of his. He had a lot of branches to the League of Assassins, and the Yakuza was no exception. He wanted the Yakuza to be brought back to a form of notoriety, and with having Izuku be the one to help with that, It would also give Izuku more experience in the underworld, understand what it's really like to work with all sorts of people. By being part of the Shiosaikai, he would understand different forms of business that wouldn't be told in schools today. He would also learn how to be more ruthless and how to be more obscure. Is that a word? He would understand how to be better with keeping secrets as well, you could say. Better with many things, such as keeping a low profile, being able to detect lies from early on, who's a hero in disguise, all those sorts. And that's what Rachel Ghul was hoping for Izuku to learn while part of the Shiosaikai, and he would make sure that Cassandra was with him during these times as well. The Shiosaikai would only think that these two were some punks at first, but they would show their combat prowess all too soon enough. I don't know how to say it. Basically, they would show their combat prowess relatively quickly, or at least Cassandra, while Izuku, he would stay off the line of combat. He would be more into showing the strategic side of himself, his business side. That's the part Izuku really wanted to let be known. During school hours, Izuku would pretty much be the most popular kid in his class with how enthusiastic he was when it came on to business. Many people within his class viewed him as an I refuse to say that name. As a very great business owner in the future. They saw him being a CEO of a company in only a couple of years, with how intelligent he was, how enthusiastic he was about all of these business models, and how fast his mind could calculate some of this stuff. In all honesty, sometimes people thought that he didn't even sleep with how much work he managed to get done. No one would actually expect that he was helping to manage drug deals on the side, though. Nobody would have expected this because of just how unusual it would be. Izuku had pretty much everything going for him right now, so why would he sell drugs? Why would he be part of a gang? And when it came on to Cassandra as well, many other students found her to be weird with how she rarely ever talked, and how she knew how to fight really, really well. They questioned why she wasn't part of Class 1A, especially with her quirk, in which it simply gave her, I don't really know, quick reflexes and enhanced durability. But even then, with how she used it, it was insane. She was literally cutting through metal at times. They found out to be insane, but the fact that she was in this class, a business class, that was pretty unusual for most of them. And the fact that she would usually hang around Izuku as well left many people scratching their heads. Now, when it came on to the Shiosaikai side of things, Izuku, like I said before, he would be helping with the drug deals. He would make sure to add on to the profit, and although they weren't really recognized at first, they would end up making their way up the empire. Chisaki, he would not necessarily know who Izuku was just yet. As far as he was concerned, he was dealing with a kid by the name of Yamakumo, and he just treated him like any other common thug. Izuku would show himself to be far more than just that, though. He needed to earn Sasaki's respect, and in order to do that, he needed to go a step further than just selling drugs really well. You see, Izuku, he would begin to experiment with some of the drugs in order to find out what formula gave more upper kick, what sort of stimulant was needed to get people really addicted and have them running back for more each and every time. It wasn't enough to just simply sell ecstasy and coke anymore in this world. After all, many people were getting into some serious drugs because of the fact that they wanted to enhance their quirks, or they just needed a really quick high. And then there were some people who literally had quirks related to chemical production as well. So Izuku had to be at the very top of his game. Izuku and Cassandra would get into trouble with the law from time to time, but Izuku, he would actually be prepared in these situations. He would always keep the strap on him, to be honest. He would usually have guns on his person whenever he was dealing with the Shiosaikai. He could never be too careful. Sure, he was very proficient in hand-to-hand combat, but he didn't want to get his hands dirtied all that often and risk going insane. He would rather fight from a distance, you could say, while Cassandra, most of the time, she would usually be enough anyways. Regeneration quirk allowed him to push his strength to heightened levels as well. His regeneration quirk basically allowed him to have quite a bit of agility, so he would jump over fences and walls from time to time with Cassandra. And this wasn't even just peak human conditioning either. You see, Izuku had been training since he was around the age of 5 years old. So naturally, he would be rather athletic, you could say. He would become well known in the underworld in only a couple of months for his drug deals, due to him making, enhanced versions of the regular sort of drugs. More people would end up becoming addicted than usual, and since he was the only one on the block who knew the exact formula for these drugs, he could raise the price to pretty much however he really saw fit. By doing this, he increased profits tenfold, and with this sort of production that Izuku was doing, he would be promoted in the Shiosaikai for the amount of profit he was making. I know I pretty much repeated that, but oh well. For the amount of profit he was making, it was pretty much putting everybody else to shame. Cassandra would basically be seen as his partner in crime, stacking up a body count for dead police officers, and she would even eventually kill a hero or two. Cassandra would have been stacking up quite a bit of a body count, but she was also becoming rather strong as well in order to match up with the serious threats that were coming after her. Although when it came onto those heroes, they weren't top tier heroes, not top 10 heroes or anything. Nah, more so around the level of, how should I say it, the normal hero. You know, the person that Ida was interning with during the Stain arc, or like the Hosu City arc, I should say. Most police officers, they were trying to crack down on these cases, but it was getting harder and harder each time. They were covering their tracks better each and every time, and this would have been very frustrating for the police officers. At first, these two were a bit sloppy, but as time began to pass by, these two would manage to become more and more proficient in these drug deals that it was insane. And they were doing it at pretty late times as well. it was rather sporadic, to be honest. Sometimes they could be doing it all the way from 8 p.m. and then other times they were doing it at 12, 2, or 3 in the morning. They were trying to keep these cases under very tight locks. They're trying to keep it very tight shut, you could say. And they were trying to make sure that this information didn't get out to the media. But unfortunately, things would begin to change by the time the USJ happened. You see, the League of Villains, they were another branch of the League of Assassins here. They'd been recruiting other villains for this event as well, and Izuku heard about it from one of his clients. He found this to be intriguing. He decided to tap in for this event. The main reason Izuku wanted to be part of this event was for the fact that it would be good for publicity. It would be a pretty good publicity stunt if Izuku went in and was part of the USJ raid. The way he saw it was that there would be more promotion for the Shiosaikai if he killed a couple of students and managed to get his face on the news. He would get connected back to the Yakuza once his face was on the news as well, or at least on the newspapers. Some police officers would recognize him, and at that point, they would have literally no other choice but to reveal the fact that this kid was part of the Yakuza, and that he was a drug dealer. Now this kid turned a killer as well. More people would be on the Yakuza's radar after that, and in all honesty, it sounded pretty genius inside of his head. That's until he saw the no move for the first time, and saw how they were able to contend with All Might. You see, Izuku was always confident in his strength, but this was a whole nother level. He had never imagined being able to really be able to contend with something like that. The League of Villains managed to create a monster that was able to contend with the likes of All Might. And the closest Izuku could ever reach All Might's strength, even if he was injured, was, well, if he used some of Bane's venom. And that actually gave Izuku another idea. You see, Izuku, although he wasn't able to become as strong as All Might simply through pure strength alone, simply through great sweat, blood, tears, the saying, all that stuff alone, that it would probably be another story if he decided to experiment with drugs, you could say. He decided to experiment with steroids, Bane's venom, and quirks. Actually, he knew that the Yakuza had been working on quirk enhancers for a bit, so he figured why not improve upon that as well. He had basically been improving on many drugs throughout the time he had been part of the Yakuza, so he figured that maybe, just maybe, he could go on to improve upon these quirk enhancers. They arguably had one of the weakest variants right now, only lasting a couple minutes at a time, but if he could fix that, he would basically be the Yakuza's hero, in quotation marks, you could say. If he could have it be that it would basically be this. If he could turn 5 minutes of a quirk enhancer into 25 minutes, or at the very least 10 minutes or more, that would change the game for the Yakuza. he was already pretty much changing the game already, if we're being completely honest, with how he was creating such a profit for the Yakuza, and he was having his name be spread throughout the underworld at such a rapid rate. But now, if he were to also mess with these sort of drugs, mess with the ability to enhance your quirk tenfold, if you were really that lucky, oh, he would become a legend in the making. Many people in the underworld would know his name at that point, and many people would want to have an alliance with the Yakuza at that point. Many people would probably want to invest in the Yakuza and whatever their next batch was. They want to get a tiny piece of that profit. And if the Yakuza continue to grow like that, the Yakuza would be back to notoriety in no time. They would be at their prime once more, especially with the amount of people that would want to join the Yakuza at that point. Sure, you got investors, and now you got people that want to join the Yakuza, and then you're just continuously building the empire. You have more people selling these sort of drugs at the prices that Izuku was putting them at, and the fact that nobody else besides Izuku and the Yakuza was selling them. Nobody could really get their hands on any sort besides some off-brand versions because of the fact that they don't know the actual chemicals to it. Oh, it would be pretty insane in all honesty. Yeah, pretty much Izuku was just having these dream spasms every day, and so this is what would take most of Izuku's time. Endless days and nights Izuku would be working on this, using test experiments in the form of people who were captured by their psychi who were being late on their payments. And although some ended up being good, most of them, they ended up becoming grotesque freaks of nature that Chisaki would just kill right after. Izuku would just continuously work on his experiment until he eventually made a breakthrough. The variant he managed to create was capable of amplifying a quirk. It was capable of amplifying a person's quirk, increasing muscle size and speed. And not only that, but it did not cause a person to go insane either. It even lasted for an hour on top of that. Yeah, he was going to make this insane. He was going to make quite a bit of bucks off of that, but he also had to make an off-brand version that only lasted for half as long to sell to the general public. He imagined that if he would sell this actual version to the public, many people would try and make copies of it. If it got into the wrong hands, then that might be an issue for the Yakuza. Now, if the Yakuza were the only ones with the actual version, the version that lasted an hour or more, that didn't cause for you to go insane or anything along those lines, and they were selling the off-brand versions to people, and then those people trying to attack the Yakuza would be fine for the most part. Those people got the off-brand versions. The Yakuza were the only ones that ever got the real versions of Izuku's stuff. Now, another thing I should mention is, of course, Ida. You see, without Izuku during the Hosu incident, he was too busy making a quick buck, or he was in his lab at the time. Ida, he would have died to stain, but Ida's death aside, heroes would be noticing a pattern here. They would be noticing an increase in the crime rate for some reason. You see, the villains were getting stronger. It was almost as if all the villains they had A-list quirks now. Even UA teachers were noticing this, and they wanted to get to the bottom of it immediately. Azuka would be hearing these rumors in class about villains becoming more powerful nowadays, and heroes were struggling to deal with them, and he would smirk. Many people would look over to Azuka, questioning what he was smiling about, and Azuka would be mentioning the fact that, hey, he was just thinking about the amount of products he could sell with this new news. Although the crime rate was increasing, that meant that more people needed protection with heroes. More people needed protection coming from these heroes, and he could probably market these heroes so well because of it. He could probably make some of these heroes millionaires or billionaires off of his product placements in the future. And many people were like, yeah, Izuku, you got a really good point. But they wouldn't even really know what was really going on in his mind. Izuku wasn't really thinking about that. No, he was actually thinking more about the fact that his influence was really beginning to show. Izuku was rising in the ranks fast for the Shiosaikai. And by the time of Bakugo's kidnapping, the Shiosaikai was back on its feet, far above its original standing. Actually, they were hustling more than ever, and Izuku wasn't even selling drugs anymore. He had long surpassed that. He was instead the supplier for all the drug dealers in Japan who worked for the Shiosaikai at this point. They were expanding their territory, and Chisaki was beginning to like Izuku for his efforts. He had gained his respect at this point. He had showed him his quirk erasing bullets, and source for all of it as well. And this would be what disturbed Izuku, though. Even though he had some very loose morals, he had morals nonetheless. And you see, when this guy was doing to this little girl was not okay. This was not good for business whatsoever. This was something that Izuku did not want to have be part of his name or business whatsoever. Izuku would have realized what he had to do. He needed to get rid of Chisaki. He needed to become the head of the operations from here on out. But he understood just how powerful Chisaki's quirk was. He understood just how powerful Overhaul was. And he would be a fool to even try and attempt to attack him right now. He was far smarter than that. He decided to play the waiting game for now, and he would decide to wait until the right moment. The right moment would eventually come, and when that happened, he was going to bust a cap in the back of Chisaki's head, make sure that he learned a lesson for messing with little girls. That came out wrong. Basically, what I mean to say is, for messing with people's lives. Young children. You don't mess with young children. That's basically the only line that would be crossed when it came onto Izuku. Izuku was down for pretty much any dastardly thing besides hurting little kids. He wasn't going to mess with that, no matter how profitable it may be. So, in the fight with Alpha One, the fight between Alpha One and All Might, Izuku would have been watching it on the news, and Izuku would also see something interesting from Alpha One. He would see Alpha One hesitate, and he would realize just what he was hesitating about. He would have understood immediately that he was considering maybe using the Shiosai's trigger against All Might, but Alpha One actually decided to go against it. because of just how seriously addictive that it was. The thing about the off-brand version of the trigger that Izuku had made at this point was that it was seriously addictive for many people. He made it that way so that people would always be coming back as well. Each and every last one of his drugs, he honestly made them incredibly addictive, except for the Shiosaikai themselves. So even all for one would get triggered, but only the off-brand version. He could never get the proper version. He figured that it was out there. He had no doubt in his mind that there was probably a better version out there, but he just did not have access to it for some reason. The best he could get was maybe 45 minutes, and even then, that still had very addictive properties to it. He was also aware of the fact that there was a connection to the League of Assassins that the Shiosaikai had. Sure, the League of Villains also had a connection to the League of Assassins and all, but he wasn't really thinking much about the League of Villains right now. He was thinking more about the fact that if he were to use Trigger right now and then he still gets defeated and is sent to Tartarus, they may try and interrogate him about it. And sure, he may not really answer most of their questions or so, but they would definitely try something. They would try and find more people like All For One out there. And the fact that All For One was also going to be addicted to Trigger as well, he might not be as mentally sound anymore. If they were to actually interrogate him, they may end up making false promises saying that, oh, they may give him Trigger in order to tell them about where he got it from, more of Trigger. And he might just end up becoming gullible enough at that point from his depravity of it to actually tell them, which would be incredibly bad for business. And it might just lead him back to the League of Assassins on top of that. He figured that the League of Assassins would probably retreat from later on from Tartarus anyways. Being able to steal and pass on quirks to others was extremely valuable to Raj Al Ghul after all. And on top of that, even with the amount of people that joined the League of Assassins, for those that did not necessarily have quirks, but they were incredibly skilled in what they did, All For One would simply supply them with quirks to make them even stronger at times, which helped to build a very large army of assassins over time. That and mixing it in with a little bit of brainwashing for absolute loyalty. They even managed to get a few heroes as well from this technique. There's no doubt in All For One's mind that the League of Assassins would eventually retrieve him, and Izuku would have also been watching with the same mentality as well. Izuku would find out about the defeat and shrug it off. It was pretty much just one small victory for the heroes at this point. They really had no idea what was in store for them later on after all. Oh no. You see, Izuku would find out about the meeting between Shigaraki and Chisaki one day while he was experimenting with more drugs, and he would be intrigued. They didn't seem to have all that great of an interaction though. You see, conflict between the two branches could be great for him stealing the throne from Chisaki without using Daddy Dearest's influence. He wanted to use his own influence in the long run. He didn't want to rely on his father for pretty much anything while he was part of the Shiosaikai. He wanted to create his own sort of mini empire in the Shiosaikai. and prove to his father that he was extremely capable, more capable than his sisters would ever be, or sister, I should say, Talia al Ghul. Izuku would be plotting everything from behind the scenes, waiting for the exact moment to strike. He heard rumors from some of the UA students one day about there apparently being a squadron being built up to actually take down the Shiosaikai too. He would have been in his business class at the time. He was basically just working on a business model while some of the other kids were having a conversation. He was eavesdropping, and in this eavesdropping he would hear this talk about how they were going to have some sort of raid. The heroes were even having some students from class 1A and B being part of this raid on the Shiosaikai and its other branches, mainly focused on the HQ though, since that's where everything was really starting from. Get rid of the head and the rest of the Shiosaikai would collapse, was pretty much many people's thoughts about it. This just interested Izuku. This was Izuku's thinking. He was thinking about it being a third party at this point. There was Izuku plotting against Chisaki, with Chisaki probably not even realizing at first. And now there was a third party coming into the fray as well. Well, wasn't this fascinating? This made things even better for Izuku. On the day of the raid, you see, on the day of the raid, Izuku would notice all of the commotion that was happening. He would decide to use this commotion to his advantage. He would decide to shoot both Mirio and Chisaki with quirky racing bullets. Although when it came down to Mirio, he would have shot him in a non-vital area, while when it came on to Chisaki, he would have shot him through the head. This would effectively have killed Chisaki, and he found a serious sense of irony in this. The quirky racing bullets that he basically prided himself on for these past couple of months were the same things that actually killed him. Izuku would run away with Eri. No one would have seen who had shot Chisaki, but it wouldn't really matter now. Mirio would have also been quirkless, so he was a non-factor anymore either. Most of the Shiosaikai would be arrested, but Izuku he would manage to escape with Eri and Cassandra. Izuku didn't really care for most of the Saikai, to be honest. He knew what made the Shiosaikai grow anyways. He knew that the Shiosaikai only really grew because of his drugs and his formulas. He knew how to recover. He just had to buddy up with the League of Villains and... well, I shouldn't say buddy up. He just needed to become buddy-buddy with the League of Villains and team up with them and become... I don't even know how to say it. Basically like this. All he really needed to do was to be on good terms with the League of Villains. They don't trust each other, but that's not necessarily something that they have to do. They don't necessarily have to trust each other. Izuku just needed to have them understand that they were going to have mutual benefits. The League would actually have an intelligent guy on their team, help them manage a lot better. Manage the schemes, I should say. More people would be joining, and the fodder would just get pumped with drugs. They would be expendables at best, enough to catch the attention of heroes and distract them while they escape if it's someone like Endeavor. The fact that League also had no moves would be a plus for Izuku, even if they were harder to produce without Ult for One. which wouldn't really be all that big of an issue because of the fact that he was probably going to come back in a couple of months. He figured that was something that the League of Assassins was already preparing for in order to rescue one of the most important assets, all for one that I'm speaking of. Izuku would make his way to the League of Villains and propose the mutual benefit system. And although Shigaraki was a bit hesitant at first, Izuku would mention the fact that he even was the one to actually kill Chisaki after finding out the heinous acts he was doing behind the scenes, the way that he was able to create these quirk erasing bullets in the first place. It was not ideal at all, but when Shigaraki ended up finding out that Izuku was the one to kill and Chisaki, he would immediately accept Izuku into the League of Villains. My Villain Academia would, at this point, be a much larger army going to the city, wreaking wreaking havoc to the civilians there. It would be even more of a landslide here with Izuku having all of this extra force behind him. He had his drugs pumping up into all of these expendables, and he was also doing a lot of drug deals on the side as well. He hadn't been doing drug deals for a long time, but he figured that he may as well just do it for old time's sake, just get his name out a little bit more. Until he realized, why is he doing that? He realized that he could just let a little Brady be sent. And have people know that Izuku was with the League of Villains now. He was working with the League of Villains from moving on forward. And just that little information alone would be enough to cause for a lot of traction for the League of Villains to be created, especially with how hyper they already were to begin with. Many people were acknowledging the League of Villains for very crazy things, but now with Izuku on their side, many people wanted to join the League of Villains now. And like I said before, although many people who wanted to join the League were fodder, they were expendables. They just needed to be pumped up with drugs, or trigger, I should say. Not even the best version, the ones that he would usually give out to the Shiasakai. You see, that's more so for the actual useful members of the League of Villains, such as Shigaraki, Toga, Twice, and Dabi. You get the point. But when it came on to the expendables, he usually just gave them the off-brand versions that were seriously addictive as well, making sure that they were always loyal to the League of Villains if they were to ever have to use this drug. If they ever used the drug, they would need to always be part of the League of Villains for moving on forward, because of the fact that they were the only ones that could really supply them with said drugs. And if they were to ever leave the League, there would basically be a ban for that person from these drugs. People would recognize the faces of these people, and they would no longer be able to even buy these drugs from any sort of drug dealer on the side of the street. They would usually just say, hey, it's bad for business. And of course, when it came onto the cities though, it would be even more of a landslide, of course, when I mention My Villain Academia. Izuku saw the potential of Twice during this time. When he saw Twice use his quake for the very first time, he never really thought about it all that much. Oh, it's just a duplication quake. Nothing all that special. But then he saw Sadman's parade. This was when he saw the true extent of what's his name? Of Twice. This would have been an eye-opener for Izuku. You see, Izuku, he never really thought much about the potential until that day, and he wanted to have some of his DNA spliced with Twice's own in order to get that quirk as well, in case Twice died. That last part was a bit questionable though. Izuku wasn't sure if it would work, but it would be worth a shot. So from there, it would literally just be Izuku taking over the Liberation Army. Izuku would become a kingpin, you could say, after League of Villains managed to completely curb stomp the Liberation Army. And they would use the technology in order to advance their creations as well. Izuku would end up finding himself become a kingpin of sorts, with such a large influence. He literally had control over a whole city, for crying out loud. A city full. He had an army basically that was basically a whole city's worth of people, and then some. He technically had an army already with the amount of other people that were coming around, but now he had twice the army. He had a whole city's worth of people become part of his army, and now he was also supplying drugs for these people as well. They were also helping to distribute these drugs even faster than ever before. Japan would get taken over by these villains, as Izuku would be upping the potency of Trigger to last hours upon hours at this point, bigger buffs in quake usage, and he would even have clones doing his bidding. You see, he managed to actually get this to be successful. His splicing of his own DNA with Twice's own in order to get that quirk. It was long and arduous, or however you pronounce that word. It was very frustrating basically, but eventually Izuku managed to find some success. Although it wasn't able to create the same amount of clones as Twice at first, eventually he managed to outperform the guy. He managed to have these clones do his bidding, and with his clones basically helping him all the time when it came on to creating the drugs, he'll be able to spread them out faster than ever before. The heroes wouldn't really be able to even compete with the League of Villains anymore. A war would end up spreading because of this. The League of Villains was well aware of the fact that the heroes were struggling, and they would use this to their advantage. They would have a war be spread out, and All For One would have also been freed from Tartarus at this time. They would have basically curb stomped the heroes, especially with the fact that they were using these quirk enhancers all throughout the war. By the end of the war, Izuku would have declared Japan to be the property of the League of Assassins. They would do quirk exchanges for the weaker or quirkless soldiers from there on out, and Izuku would sit on the throne of his new empire. His father would applaud him for his efforts before questioning whether or not he wished to expand onto other countries as well. Azuku would smile hearing that, and he would say simply, yes, he would love that. And that is how we end the story. And yeah, you guys already know the details. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you've been rocking my content for a little while, maybe hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell. Maybe leave a comment. Oh, and please share and to others that may be interested in this sort of content as well. Beyond that, it is your boy King Ty Next signing out. Peace.